president of the Enfield Historical Society. Tonight's presentation is going to be about shad fishing. We're fortunate to have Bill Fournier, who's a member of this historic society and about 5 others, do the presentation. He is the boat and safety instructor for DEP for 30 years and town marine officer for Windsor Lock since 1983. So he should know what he's talking about. Should note that after the presentation, we'll have our regular meeting, and we're going to vote on the proposed bylaw revisions that we had at the November meeting. Will be voted on tonight. So that only applies to people who are members of the Historic Society. So enjoy the presentation.
Thank you. Hi, I'm back for the 3rd time. I'm going to amend the bylaws. You might want to put something in to keep Bill Fournier and his collections out of here. I have to give credit where credit is due. This was in the reminder back, oh golly, the 1980 something, and it said shad catch 40 years ago. Well, I edited it because this photo was done 70 years ago. That's my father, William, and the young Billy, 2 years old. So you all owe this to my dad. And the fish. The fish are forever, sort of, except I did make a note over here that says pollution, politics, and regulation, or as Douglas Adams said, goodbye and thanks for all the fish. We got a whole bunch of stuff. It becomes kind of a show and tell of sorts. Being associated with the DEP, I made a phone call, and lo and behold, they were quite responsive. I was looking for a fish, and they gave us 4 different types of herring, along with color reports that I kind of whittled down a bit and made a display of what goes on down there. There are a number of books that are set out, some of the local histories, Suffield, Windsor, Dan Howard's 1935 Windsor history, a new history of old Windsor. And I culled out a few things and mounted them up. The board to the right, to the left and center. It's from Harper's New Monthly Magazine in 1880, and it's about shad and alewives, and it shows in those woodcuts, or steel engravings probably at that time, pictures of the activities that went on in commercial shad fishing. So there's a mix here of both commercial shad fishing and the sport fishing. We have a couple of outboard motors. The green one on the left is an Elgin. The 1946, it was my father's, and it still runs. And there's some history that's called out of a couple of publications. One is the old outboard book. The other one is the history of the aluminum foundries in Wisconsin that made the Elgin. They became West Bend pots and pans and all kinds of stuff. But they did outboard motors right up into, I have a 1986 Chrysler outboard that was made by West Bend. And I've lost track of whether they're still around or not. So there's a couple of items there. Mike Solinsky brought along A 1936 Bendix, that's a pre-war outboard. The Elgin's a post-war outboard, and there's write-up for that also. And it's in really good shape. Given the age, both of these have survived quite well. Lures. The lures are one of those cottage industries, cellar hobbyists. I'm looking at Ron over here, and I've got a ladle and mold. Ron makes bullets with his. When I was a kid, my father would fire up the Coleman camp stove, and you had to keep pumping it up for the white gas to vaporize in the thing. And there'd be a little cast iron pot and a label and molds. You could make split sinkers, you could make the teardrop, you could make clinchers, shad darts, and jigs. For the people who cast from shore for shad fishing, which they did for eons, the darts became extremely popular. Basically, the bead was kind of built in. They had weight, so even if they were fishing with a fly rod, and we'll get to rods and reels in a little bit, they had a little bit of weight to carry out. Lures can be as simple as plain gold hook. Mike Miller's over there somewhere, and he and I were talking about the plain gold hook and the colored beads. And these are dressed out as they would be kind of most successful on a given day. And then the next day, the finicky shad would want something else. So everybody would carry a combination of lures. They'd try their favorites first. If that wasn't working, they would switch. There was a gentleman called, his name was Jimmy Lacko. He had one leg. He would come fishing every weekend. He would get little silver spoons and solder a hook to it. And it was rare back in the 50s that he didn't come in with a load of shad that numbered 100. It was a very successful lure. Back in the day, kind of pun intended, Frank Day made these lures, which are basically a trout lure, but they're called the shad. There's a picture of the shad over there. And simply there are a couple of feathers tied on with a bit of tinsel, and the bead at the head is painted. They came in red, orange, and yellow. And you throw on combinations of beads. Gentleman came in tonight and bought a lure his father made. Simply a red felt or cotton on a plain hook with the most popular red beads of the early days. They were faceted, they were clear. So those are some vintage beads. Later on, excuse me, they came to be plastic of sorts. his father also made this style, which is a hook soldered onto a blade. And I recognize it as something my father had used also, quite similar. It was a commercially made lure that was called the Trixerino, and it had a little blade on the back. Quite similarly, there's one made by Pfluger, and it was fish-shaped. And again, most of them were in red and white. Progressing across, it's a little tiny, but we used to build our own shad boats to rent in Windsor Locks. And we had a combination of some aluminum boats. Originally, they were all plank bottom rowboats that my father had gotten from the King brothers over at Congamon, North Pond. My father didn't like the narrowness. Plywood came along, pretty available, and he widened the boat, made his own spreaders for the bend, made out of pine. The pine was usually purchased from Spear Lumber over in West Suffield. And there's a nose piece that is kind of arrowhead shaped. I didn't go to that bother in this. This was a literature shelf that my daughter and I had made back in the mid-90s for boating safety stuff. And these are some of the books that I went into to see what other people were saying about shad fishing. John McPhee both shad fished a lot to get his material and also researched. And his book was done back in 2002. And it's a good read. They're available still on Amazon, on eBay, etc., wherever we manage to hit our older books. Once in a while in a book sale. Some of these books are from book sales, others are off the web these days. These panels in here are some of the family photographs. Happens to be my mother's father. On a chase lounge with my brother Doug, who's from Enfield also, and my two sisters. And it has the picture of the sign that says Fournier's Boats. It was made by Coca-Cola. Got the red centerpiece, but the rest of the metal sign is gone. My communion pictures. The significance of that is, well, there's my father as a younger man, and my mother as a younger woman. I don't know, me probably 10 years old. And right here, the maple tree in the front yard was used to store the oars. So people came in to rent a boat, a pair of oars, and it came along, there was a regulation that you had to have a personal flotation device, a seat cushion. So if they didn't have their own seat cushions, they rented one of those for a quarter, which was a quarter of the cost of renting the boat. Some of the wooden rowboats are there. I'm in a picture here in my communion clothes holding fish with a couple of fishermen stretching out their catch. The fishermen happen to be a couple of guys, last name Lee. Aiden Lee was one of them, from New Hartford. I was at a women's club flea market down in Windsor, and lo and behold, there was a postcard addressed to Aiden Lee. And, brought back some memories. A couple of the other regular fishermen, Tom Rajensky was a character who actually took a channel catfish, the first one we had seen back in 1957 or 58, on a shad board instead of live bait. So you never know what you're going to catch in the river. There are other folks, Jimmy Lacko is over on the side, he's only halfway in the picture. 1960 flood, you see the boats floating around in the side yard and the front yard, over the street, etc. It came in April, so the boats were already in. Yep. And some of the boats fishing out in front of the house, my brother and sisters down by the water, and some of the guys who would cast from shore. The area of the riverbank was fairly clear back then, and quite a number of people fished along 5A before it became 159. And there was actually a parking area where River Road and Windsor Locks met up with 5A. Again, Harper's Monthly, and there's some interesting stuff in there if you give it a gander. There's a postcard view here of commercial fishermen hauling in the nets down in Middletown. The black and white is of commercial fishermen hauling, again, in Middletown. And there's a steam-powered tug going up the river with what looks like some sorts of cranes or derricks on it, for whatever reason. Maybe a bridge building operation. There's a few more photos that came from here. One of the last commercial fishermen on the river. This is done by Whit Griswold, professor over at UPA. The last of the bone shad operations. Last I knew was still in operation down in Haddam. Come up along 154, and there it is. And a catch of shad in a more modern day plastic tub. And alewife. Wow, I thought these fish were alewife, shad.
When you catch them with that thing.
Yeah. These are from last fall's studies that the DEP does, and they look and see what the young look like. And they do a count. And they're usually catch and release, but they take a few back with them for study in the lab down at Old Line. So you'll see American shad, alewife, the blueback herring, and Manhattan. And of course, then there also are the ocean herring that don't come up the river. But that's a major industry, and actually, there's a recent newspaper article from last, June or July. Huge herring catch worries rival fishermen. And this is about, a lot of this is about regulations. There's a little bit here from McPhee's book. The upper part is from a 1983 fisherman's guide. And it is information about the state-controlled area. It was over in Suffield at the Enfield Dam. And people paid to go in. There were rules and regulations, they're listed here, and a license fee. And a fishing license was $9. It's now $28. Everything goes up. And you can see the simple part of the regulations for shad versus today's regulations for shad and alewives, greatly expanded. There was another publication, Heading Out, and it had an article in it. And it was written by Edward Hewley. May 1985. 1983. My father's outboard from when I was but a brat, etc., etc. I'll tell you, Andy's really looking forward to next month's program on, are you a collector or a hoarder, I believe, you know. The only reason I'm able to get away with it is because I take the collection out and do something with it, but I think I'm a borderline hoarder. Find out next month. These are typical of the oars that were used with the boats. These also were bought over at King Brothers. My father, by trade, was a cabinet maker. Eventually, he had worked at the metal top for the Walkers, who owned it about the time of its closing. And they had an antique business. So he was doing furniture refinishing for them. Now he would be appalled at the condition of these because the varnish is pretty well gone. I tell my boys oftentimes when they're doing some sort of a woodworking project, something that my father rarely said, which was, it ain't a piano. But if you had seen these oars back in their day when he used them, they had a finish on them like a piano. The oar locks also were obtained over at King's. As were the cast iron other part of the oar lock. You note the color red. That was on the outside of the boat. In here would have been the sideboard, and at the top of the gunnel, a trim piece. So it was 1.5 inches wide. This fit on it. Red was the trim color on the boats. There are 2 planks to make the boat. The bottom planks were always painted red. The outside bottom was painted green. Inside the boat was always painted the green, and the upper board was always white. The paint had a history also. There was a good friend of a guy from Windsor Locks named Charlie Belletti, who painted Tidal gas stations everywhere. And at the end of the season, painting season, he'd call my father and say, well, yeah, I got 6 gallons of red left and, 8 gallons of green left. So my father would go and purchase the leftovers for $1 a gallon. And come February, the boats would start to go into the garage 2 at a time. The old plank bottoms needed to be stripped of their caulking, new caulking put in, new paint, and then they went outside. As soon as the water came up, the boats went in, and those plank bottoms went in first. They were the most work, and they needed to soak up. The boards needed to swell against that caulking to keep them dry. So it was a blessing when we started doing the other ones with the plywood. They still needed the paint, but you avoided all of the caulking. So February was scrape and paint time for me in the garage, and I grew up tending the wood stove.
At what age did you start scraping?
Pardon?
At what age were you when you first started scraping the boats?
7. I got my first rowboat from the King brothers. My father financed it for me. He paid for the boat. I rented the boat along with all of his boats, and as the dollars came in, it paid off the debt, and it became my boat at 7 years old. I'm going to boast a little bit, but of all the fishermen that came along, for the most part, there are those who didn't have a motor who would go out and row, and a lot of them would row downstream because it was the easy way to go. Well, Connecticut River has at least a 4-mile-an-hour current, and in the springtime a little more, and they'd be out off the shore by 500 feet or so, struggling to get them upstream. They'd manage to get to shore downstream somewhere, and somebody had to bring the boats home at night. Yeah, at 7, 8 years old, I could outrow those guys. But my dad gave me a trick. Stay next to the shore. The current is slack next to the shore. Hi guys. So it was good fun. Another part of Shad history, over near the railroad bridge, there's an abutment on the Windsor-Lock-Suffield side. And guys had nets that were 3 feet, 4 feet. They'd stand on that abutment and they would dip the net, called a dip net. This is a landing net that I extended for river cleanup so I could reach under the bushes to get cans and bottles out of the canal and such. But the dip net would be dumped in, and there's actually a place on old maps of Windsor Locks that's called the Fish Place. And Conroy, I think was the name of the guy who had the fish works. And Mrs. Griswold had the fish place for a while also, back in the days. So shad fishing played a part in Windsor Lock's industry of sorts. One of the things in the article that goes with Harper's was that they talked about commercial fishermen. And they talked about them as lower class folks than, this is shortly after the slaves, of field hands. And there was very little respect for a fisherman. They were tough, they were rugged, they drank, they sang, but they swore. They, go out for long periods of time. They were like people who would chase gold. You never knew what kind of a catch you were going to get. The cost was at least always the same, if not more, for running the vessel out. And it's hazardous work. I don't know, many of you may have seen that program, America's Deadliest Catch. It is hazardous. You're on the water. Water's unforgiving. Boating safety, we're always talking about wear PFP. That's the new term the Coast Guard gave life jackets. And after 20 some odd years, they decided it wasn't catching on, so now they call them life jackets again. Best thing, wear it. I go ice fishing and I wear PFD under my winter jacket. Driving out on Winnipesaukee one time on 32 inches of ice. Well, you think it's 32 inches everywhere, but you can't be sure. Keep the windows open, put an extra life jacket on and get ready to get out and swim toward the surface. So all in all, there's a lot involved in the history. A lot is passed down word of mouth from fisherman to fisherman. The best places to go and cast from shore, whatever. What I didn't mention about this was that my father went out. People fished from the Windsor Bridge. They fished up at the dam. He went out in a boat that my grandfather had for dragging firewood in out of the river, which I did in the 80s also. Go out and catch some of that junk coming down in the springtime, let it dry out, got your firewood. He took that boat out, anchored out, and caught shad quite quickly. Another fellow came along from New Hartford. His name was Clarence Grace. He had heard about my father having a boat. He said, hey, how about taking me up to the bridge so I can fish up there? My father said, why do you want to go to the bridge? Right out here. Oh, no. And as it went, my father took him out. They landed a good-sized catch. Grace told all his friends and people from Litchfield and Hartford and all over the place, coming and renting boats, and the business expanded. And it went on into the 70s. Fishermen are kind of ingenious. Yes?
When was the shad season? I know nothing about fishing.
Shad season.
And were they going up or downstream?
April 15th through about the 1st of June. And it still is, except they modified it to April 1st. They go back and forth between the April 1st, second Saturday, the third Saturday in April. The run depends on temperature of the water. 57, 58 degrees. When the water in Windsor Locks passing through is 57, 58 degrees, the shad are in to spawn.
They come from the ocean? I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea where shad come from the ocean, go
They come
upstream?
from the ocean. They're called anadromous, meaning that they live in the ocean, but they return, just like salmon do, to spawn in the river that they were born in. These small fish are called fry. Now, these have hatched in June, stayed in the area, and their size depends on how much food they got. So you'll see varying sizes of the fry. That's what the small guys are called, the fry. And these were taken in September. All of these fish on the table were September fry. And you see they're varying sizes. Basically because some found more food than others did. The adult shad don't feed, or feed very slightly, if at all, during their spawn. And as soon as they spawn, they head back out. It's kind of a terrifying situation for them because they're attacked by bluefish, they're attacked by stripers. When I was a kid, there were not stripers in the river. There were sturgeon and bass and perch like to eat the eggs of the shad spawn. So a lot are lost because of that. Striper returned to the river, according to the Deep Fisheries Division, sometime in the 80s. And they were glad to have them. The return of the stripers, because the numbers were going down. Since the number of stripers have gone up, the number of shad have gone down. Alewives have gone down so much that it's closed season. There is no open season for the alewife anymore. In the history, reading the stuff, it said that alewives going up the brooks, the tributaries to the river, were so thick you could walk across on them. Back Revolutionary War times, they would salt and barrel or pickle shad and keep them all year long. They would feed the troops. In hard times, people ate shad. And it said that's poor man's salmon. Also, in Gill, Massachusetts, it was said that it was a replacement for pork. If you had to eat shad, you couldn't afford pork. So there's all this cultural stuff that goes with the history of shad. Some of the legend is that the troops under Washington, down Delaware way, were running out of food. And that the shad run came along just in time to save the troops. Well, it wasn't quite that dramatic, but they were supplied with some barrels of shad to help augment their provisions. And you hear little different bits and pieces and different descriptions from author to author to author and researching the stuff. This is only a smattering of the research. It's from about a half a dozen of the dozen books that I went through. Yes, bud.
Where do these shad actually spawn? Is it in this area or further north, or?
They go back to where they hatched. Some fish go all the way up into Vermont. They go up fish ladders at dams. One of the reasons for the decline of the number of fish is that dams were built during the Industrial Revolution for water power, blocking their return. They improved that somewhat by putting in fishways. But the numbers are not like they used to be. One of the comments about the Enfield Dam, the Enfield Falls Dam, was that it was not significant in blocking the fish run because the spring freshet is so high that the water flowing over it is deep enough for them to simply go up over the dam. When they get to Holyoke, that dam's some 100 feet tall, and that's significant. One of the studies here shows the number of fish that go through the fish ladder up in Holyoke. They have a window and they count them.
Are they still operating that up there?
Yeah.
When was that elevator built?
Pardon?
When was that fish elevator built?
Golly, I don't recall. I remember it back around the 60s. Yeah. The other thing that came along 1960-ish, Lester's from Suffield, a historian from Suffield, he's familiar with Kings Island and the power company wanted to build a dam for hydroelectric power at Kings Island. And there was an uproar saying, no, it's going to block the fish, and it got turned down. It was never permitted. And we have some of the old maps and surveys and things that show that. That's another whole program about river development. Yes, Bob?
Once the fish spawn, how long do they stay in this area before they actually go back into the ocean?
The fries stay until the fall. The adults go back right after they have spawned. So the fish come up, and at night you can hear flopping around. They're up near the surface, and it's described in one of the books as the males bumping the females and encouraging them to emit their eggs, the roe, and the males go around and distribute their milk, and that's what fertilizes the eggs. The eggs drift on them down to the bottom, and you know, they hatch, and then they're on their own. They're not tended. And after that occurrence, which they do for a couple or 3 nights, a particular group, the school, they head back down. And again, as I mentioned, they face those perils as they go down the river and get on down to Saybrook or Lyme, where there are a lot of things waiting to eat them because they're kind of exhausted at that point, having not eaten for the trip up and back.
Is the same thing happening in the Farmington River as it's
Yes,
happening
it
here?
is. And they have a fish ladder over at Rainbow Dam also that brings the shad up and over the Rainbow Dam. And somebody mentioned to me they had heard that an Atlantic salmon had come back up through.
The 2 reds over there is,
Okay.
didn't say where, they won't tell you.
That's the lamprey up too.
Pardon?
That's the lamprey up too.
Okay. And, yes,
What's the average size that they catch when they're
the males are 2.5 to 3.5 pounds. You get a 4.5 pound male. That's an older one, and that's very good size. The roe run anywhere from 4.5 to 8 is pretty much the outside. But the largest taken down in Florida is like 12 pounds. But that's a warmer water fish. Yes, Doug?
My uncle used to take care of a dam up in Maine when he was alive. We had a lot of fun with him, you know. We'd go across the lake and stuff,
Yeah?
go to the dam, and he had all kinds of fish there and stuff. He took care of the dams for years.
Uh-huh.
He was a guide. The guys were the fish rooms and stuff like that.
Yep. One of the other things that we see fisheries-wise is the sea lampreys. And sea lampreys are eels that come up. They attach to the side of a salmon or a shad. And they actually have a sucker mouth and chew at the side of the fish and kind of digest the juices out of the fish. And the fish are lost to that. So there's a program in the Great Lakes to eliminate the sea lampreys. It was a big problem, and they have salmon and trout out there.
How fast does the current run building Enfield Dam today as compared to the 50s?
The same.
Isn't that the same?
Yeah, above the dam, of course, it created the pool, and it was a slack pool. There was motion in it, but it had the obstruction. From the Enfield Dam down to the lower locks, and Windsor locks, you've got at least 30 feet of a downhill run in 6 miles. The water, basically in the springtime, doesn't get much deeper from the dam down to the Windsor Locks Basin. It just goes faster.
I see.
12 knots.
12.
12.
Yeah, okay.
Summertime, 4. But the difference between what it used to be and what it is now, there really isn't any difference because it's all rock. One of the other programs I've done in Windsor Locks was on the river charts. In 1879, the Corps of Engineers, Army engineers, surveyed the river to make improvements to the channel from Hartford to Hoya. And I've got those charts. In 1897, they came back again, and they were going to resurvey it, government and natural. What they found was, because of the rocky bottom and the hard-packed gravel bottom in this area, nothing changes except the sandbar from time to time. One of the things that you see on these charts are some old stone wing dams. They're just piles of rocks that go out, and they increased the water level slightly, and it made it good for the flatboats that were being pulled up, so they could get around a corner and through a shallow spot. The Indians also made stone weirs, where shad, they're described as a fish of lunacy, really. They come up to a bridge abutment, and they don't know what to do. Am I going to go left or am I going to go right? And this is a fish behavioralist that writes this out of Massachusetts. You know, the whole school waits. It's like a flock of geese. And actually, it is like a flock of geese because it's easier for the ones in the back to swim than it is for the guy out on the head. So, they talk about the behavior of the fish, and it's unpredictable. Kind of like the fishermen. I want to show you a couple of other things. Fishermen tend to be quite ingenious. Careful you don't slip and fall with this because it's going to do severe bodily damage. Can you imagine having this in your boat? A wooden boat with a 3/8 or 1/2 inch plywood bottom, or planks that are pine boards, or how about an aluminum boat? Yeah. Somebody took a piece of car axle and welded up this thing, which I bring to the boating safety classes and say, don't do this. It is a good example of something to do, however. A ring at the crown and at the top of the shank. Fishing out in the river, they have done things like drop the structure of old bridges to the bottom of the river. So you come along and you anchor in, and it gets stuck. Yeah, what do you do then? One of my experiences was that the guys put it in reverse, put the power to it, trying to rip it loose, and water came over the bow, the boat flipped over, a couple of other fishermen saved the guys, and I It was near the Windsor Locks Bridge, so I was able to catch it by throwing another favorite anchor, the grapnel hook, catching the anchor line and attaching the boat to a wrecker up on the bridge. Picked it up, the water drained out, and we saved the boat. No harm was done in the making of that episode, fortunately. So the thing is stuck. Well, with an eye at the base, some chain which helps to hold the line down toward the bottom. I've taken a little fishing line and attached the chain to the eye of the chain. So what happens? It's stuck. You can't retrieve it. Well, if you pull hard enough, the fishing line breaks and you retrieve it because it comes up as such. So it's a good way to rig an anchor. Well, it saves anchors. Keeps the river from getting full of anchors. However, I don't quite know how it worked. But guys were always coming back without anchors. A key part of a Fournier Shad livery anchor was the eye bolt. Another part that'd be hard to come by today was a tin 5-quart oil can. Gallon was not enough. You had to have the 5-quart. So the guys in town would save the 5-quart cans for my father. 2 lengths of pipe, 3/4-inch pipe. Yeah, the kid gets to use the pipe cutter and cut the lengths, the drill press, drill the holes, punch the holes in the can, slide the 2 in, put the eye bolt in place, tighten it up, and pour the cement. You mix the cement too. So, those are some of my experiences from my childhood.
But you can't. You can't take the can off, would it rust away?
Oh, yeah. Yep. There's a little bit of tin left there, but actually the tin has eroded away. We can talk about that a little bit too. The chemistry of the river has a play on the fish. Industrial revolution, pollution. A lot of acids involved actually in the making of paper. So it took a long time for the river to be cleaned up to the point where it's Class B, Class A in places. Class B is good for swimming unless it rained in the last 3 days. Class A is good any time. You can actually go out and look down in 8 feet of water now and see the bottom. At night you can shine a light down and see catfish lying on the bottom. Daytime, it's clear enough that sometimes you can see carp or catfish playing on the bottom in 8 feet of water. 12 feet of water is not unusual. Yeah. Decent. What did I miss? Oh, other kinds of anchors. as a child, these were going away. You know, Mom got the new electric kind. So these were plentiful. And it was not unusual to see guys in their own boats that had 3 or 4 of these tied together at the end of their anchor line. There was one other item that I saw once in a while, but not often, because horses had gone away. Horse weights. In your wagon you carried a horse weight, 10 pounds, 20 pounds, whatever. Put it down and tied the horse to it wherever. You didn't, there wasn't a hitching post. You could tie the buggy up. So, many of those, I'm sure, litter the bottom of the river also. Like I said, here's the last one. I don't know where the other ones went. A piece of history. What else we got? The fallen over things. On the West Coast, popular thing is to use a fly rod. Well, a lot of this fly rod, which is some fiberglass looking thing, the guys have a long line, they peel it out, and I don't fly fish, and they kind of whip the fly back and forth, and they'll throw it toward the other to shore and let it drift down in the current. It's a technique, it's a California technique, Connecticut River technique. Not many people did the fly fishing. Clarence Grace, however, always fished with a fly rod, but he didn't do this. He did the river rig, which his favorite was to have a leader with the pinch-on kind of sinkers, the beads, and a Frank Day fly. And he had the technique where he would feel the sinkers hit the bottom, and he would back it up and bring it up so that he would get to the level that the shad were running at. Depending on the turbidity, how clear the water is the sun out, is it raining, is it whatever, you have to make adjustments to the depth. One of the more successful things is a 3-way swivel, the 5-foot leader, and you adjust to the sinkers on the other line where you find success. Kind of a gray day, they're down right near the bottom. Sunnier day, they'll come up to 30 inches from the bottom, but they basically track along the bottoms. So there's a little finesse in feeling your way along. My father's antique pole was just like this. However, I remember it had little ruby glass inserts, but it was like this. Eight feet. It's a metal fly rod. And that's what he always used with the bait casting reel, a level line reel. And as a kid, you get to learn to be able to cast your lure out and without burning your thumb, use your thumb as a brake so that you don't get a bird's nest. You do see a few people who are up there to land some shad in earnest. they use a boat rod. Good strong line, only one problem. The mouth of the shad is paper thin and the hooks rip out. So you can't do what is called, even in the books, my father always said, don't force them. You gotta play them. And it may take 20 minutes to land the fish, particularly a large rub. They dive, they dart, they come up, they jump. Quite a circus. So you do see some boat rods, more modern than older, but you find these antique kinds of poles around. Popular with the bass fishermen and their bass boats are regular lighter weight spinning gear. But I know down near Enfield Dam, along the shore, all down the east side, guys are down there with surf casting rods. This one's not put together, but a spinning rod. They cast halfway across the river with this thing. And they have large plastic plugs with gang hooks on them. So you do see those in use for bass, but rarely for shad, because I think the regulars would probably laugh the guy out if they didn't eat like that. One-piece fiberglass, this is mine, and it goes back into the 60s. The reel's been replaced because I wore the other one out. But they're multi-purpose. You can catch different things with them. One that I did not bring, and you find them along the shore, and the bad thing is that it's like the guys who get a bird's nest and they clip the line off and they throw it down, which has been made illegal if you catch them, but you don't. But we responsible guys go along, we pick that up, put it in the back pocket, and crush it in a can and throw it away, or return it to a tackle shop where they recycle that stuff. A Budweiser can with some nylon 50-pound test wrapped around it with a sinker and a lure. And these guys can take that thing like it's a spinning rod and they fish with it. And pull the fish in and wrap it up, and pull the fish in and wrap it. All kinds of stuff. This is a popular one. It's lighter weight than a medium spinning rod, but a lot of play, a lot of fun for a heavier fish like a shad. I don't know, they were like 18, 19 bucks at Walmart. Grandpa, if you don't do anything else, get the grandkids a pole. Play school. My daughter would sit on one bed and cast to the other bed. When I was a kid, they put an old tire out in the field, about 100 feet away, and I could drop that sinker right in that tire. All in the thumb. Thank you, Bob.
At what age does the child need a license?
I'm sorry?
At what age does a child need a fishing license?
I think
Yeah.
it's still 12. 16. It was 12, and I read 12 in the old stuff. 12, 16. Yeah.
What's your favorite way to cook the shad?
I'm sorry?
What's your favorite way to cook the shad? Prepare the shad dish.
Oh, that's the whole thing I left out. The Indians called the shad the inside-out porcupine. They're the boniest fish going. So, hence the guy with the shad shack where he bones the fish. While I'm researching books and stuff, Annie's online, she goes, hey, look it, here's a YouTube video of how to bone a shad. You know, for all he went through to keep the meat in one piece, I would have just cut in between the bones and cooked that up. Kind of a gamey flavor, it's kind of an acquired taste. However, there's a story in one of the books about Mamie Eisenhower being in Georgia and wanting some shad. She heard about shad. So they provided her with some boned shad. So, you can cook it as a fillet, you know, the usual beer batter, whatever. Or, my father's favorite was, now you get variations of this. My father said a 2-inch plank. Somebody in the book said a 3-inch rough sawn plank. Pine works. Oh, okay. You lay the whole fish, you know, you've taken the entrails out, the head is gone, on the plank, and you bake it at 350 degrees for 45 minutes to an hour. Take it out, throw the shad away, and eat the plank. One of the other ones was a guy who made shad darts up near Enfield Dam, had the recipe and he gave it to McPhee. I remember it's in McPhee's book for that. He recommended a pressure cooker. Put the fish in, put a brick on top of it, cook the fish for an hour in the pressure cooker, throw the fish away and chew on the brick. They are bony. The flavor, The good part is in the female, and it is the rub. 2 egg sacs. Those are taken out. My family wrapped them in wax paper and cooked them on low heat in a spider. And then you put a little butter and lemon on it and eat the eggs. And actually, it's another of those acquired tastes probably. Some people eat caviar. Poor man's caviar, eat shad roe. But that's popular and it's not bony yet. So that works. And there's even a recipe for the milk. The testicular part of the male shad. There are 2 little things that look like strips of calf's liver, and some people eat that. Similar to, what do they call them, sour breads? I don't know. Any other questions? I'll be available, you know, you're going to have your meeting here.
Do we know where the shad goes in the ocean when they go back?
Do they want,
Do they know where the shad go after they, in the ocean?
yeah, good question. When they go back to the ocean, it is rumored that they all move up to the next river. They don't. They stay offshore near their river. They go into the depths, out off the bank, and they stay there. How they know to find the river is described as the chemistry of the river. The water has a certain smell for them that is unique. And that's how they find their way back. But they don't travel as a big pack from Florida all the way to Canada. And they have introduced shad. There is a kind of shad in China, and also in Europe they introduced some of the American shad. But shad is basically an East Coast fish. they introduced it on the west coast and it's successful out there. And returns like salmon, Fournier salmon.
Pictures of the Enfield Dam, I just wanted to show you. This thing is in the 40s, shows the salt water, that's in the 60s, so
Awesome.
it's deteriorated.
All right, I'm going to put these up near the fish because they're dam pictures that Chuck has drawn along. Chuck's with the Enfield Historical Society and our history group, the library and such. This one I saw recently, Reverend somebody from Enfield.
Yale.
Dory put it on.
Pardon?
Dory put it on.
Okay. Yep. But they have a collection of all his glass plates at the Enfield Library. So it's kind of a new resource. Do you remember what it is, Bob?
Yeah, Reverend Yale. And it's also on in the Enfield Historical Society's Facebook page.
Nice.
You can see them all there.
Okay. We share this stuff around, Bob and I, on Facebook, and, like I said, we have the Enfield Library History Group where we put on presentations. One that's coming up will be, you saw it, you didn't, you do. And it's about wildlife, fish and birds and bears and whatever, that were around historically and then went away almost to extinction, and now they've been restored in a way. Jimmy Apple from the DEEP is coming up and doing that February 24th, I believe. It'll be in the paper anyway.
Getting back to the Yale collection, the Yale pictures, most of them are like 1909. There's over, I think there's over 100 pictures of Enfield in there.
Of Enfield. Yeah. I knew that there was the one of the dam. I didn't get a chance to research whether or not he had any with pictures of shad fishermen. But, you dig around. Again, it's not the only program I do, so.
Thanks, Bill. He has his exhibits to take a look at, and we have refreshments, so if you got more questions, I'm sure he'd be glad to answer your questions.
Yep, I'm going to be turning around.
So if you have one